gonna jump straight into the questions. Yeah, everything's good.
Hi. Just want to make sure everyone can hear me. Hi, Amjad.
Perfect. Hi. Yeah, we're all good. Perfect. So yeah, just a very warm welcome again. I'm thrilled to be in this conversation with Amira. Because we're short on time, I'm going to jump right to it. Amira wrote, I'm sure you can find all more details on this, but the context for this particular panel was that Amira wrote an article for 972 magazine, where I'm working as an editor, entitled "The Occupation Enters the Metaverse." And rather than me trying to describe all of this, I'm going to give the floor to Amira to describe this this concept of what is this metaverse, especially as we're hearing it with companies like Facebook starting to develop these new brandings of these new virtual realms. And Amira wrote this piece to really navigate, how is this operating for Palestinians? What does it mean to project aspects of even apartheid into this virtual realm? So I have three questions for Amir to kind of introduce us to this concept and to learn more about it. Amir, thanks very much for joining us, first of all.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Indeed. So first and foremost, let's map out the landscape of the metaverse, the quote-unquote metaverse. Can you describe to us and to our listeners, what is this virtual realm exactly? What does it look like? How does it operate? How do users interact with it? Give us a sort of lay of the land, the lay of the landscape of what this concept is.
Yeah, sure. First of all, it's very apt that you use the word landscape to describe the metaverse, because the metaverse really refers to a vision of the internet that more closely resembles an environment, so a place, using virtual reality, augmented reality, gaming, and 3D modeling technologies. So in the most general sense, the metaverse as a single entity describes the potential of multiple immersive digital worlds to become interconnected through metaverse platforms that are created by different tech companies. So they could have different features, different aesthetics, but the metaverse is a kind of ideological or speculative position that would say that these worlds could become interconnected. So there's no exact consensus as to what this actually is or will become. But what we're talking about is technologies such as virtual reality, augmented reality, gaming engines, and sometimes blockchain-based technologies and cryptocurrencies. So in these worlds, users have avatars, they buy digital property, you can buy digital wearables, you can virtually shop, hold meetings, visit art galleries, sell NFTs. But what's important to note is that these immersive digital worlds are also extremely graphic and computing intensive, much more so than the current internet. So they require high-speed internet, graphic cards, and computing power. And it's speculative, but there are a number of platforms already in existence, and there's a lot of development around these existing platforms. So obviously you have Meta, you have Microsoft, but you also have Decentraland, Sandbox, and a number of other existing platforms. And another definition of the metaverse that is important to note for some people is that it refers to the point when our digital lives become the primary way that we socialize or earn a living. So it's a tipping point where online reality becomes as important as offline reality in earning a living or socializing. And lastly, there are some, there are sort of analogies, metaverse spaces. For example, in the U.S. military, has been using AR and VR to create simulations for military training. And the idea there too is that it's not an alternate fantasy world; it's a sort of digital twin of the current world, which makes the metaverse different from gaming because it's not a flight into fantasy, but sort of parallels the power dynamics and existing conditions of the physical world. Yeah. So, and lastly, there's also a lot of lip service as to the metaverse. Should be for everyone. It should be inclusive, but in reality, there are already major issues with digital accessibility, visibility, representation, and these should be watched carefully by activists and advocates of Palestinian digital rights.
Thank you, Amir. I really appreciate that framing of the idea of this parallel world that is reflecting all these aspects of reality on the ground. It's not just some constructed, imaginary, alternate universe. It is very much that reflection. And your article really presented that quite incredibly in terms of showing how much the systems of occupation still operate even within that realm. I want to pick up on something that you mentioned here regarding the question of power dynamics. And this is already a conversation that's happening not only in the sort of the real world, but like in the digital realm. And this is a central issue to consider. Even in this concept of a metaverse, there are big questions: who holds political power, who holds financial capital, who holds social following. These are all kind of who are the power brokers within this kind of universe. So a question I have for you is, in that respect, even though as this concept of the metaverse is slowly developing, it's still kind of emerging in this respect, who are you finding to be some of the key actors who are holding these resources or the sway in shaping this metaverse as it grows? And how are these actors using their influence? Your piece mentioned some of that, but I'm curious to hear more from you, like how these kind of actors are operating in this growing world.
Yeah, and in many cases, it's the same corporate players that dominate the sort of 2D web, are looking to make moves into the metaverse. So you have Meta and Microsoft. You have a couple of smaller or new emerging platforms, but a lot of that too has to do with who has like the computing power as well to kind of pull off these particular worlds. So I think computing power is tying into financial and political power in ways that are perhaps new to this particular era that we are embarking into. Energy, it's energy intensive. Right now the current, the Googles and the Facebooks, etc., have to process billions and billions of gigabytes of data. In the metaverse, that will be even more intensive. So to kind of understand how these dynamics and geopolitics could evolve, we need to really watch and follow and trace how these data actually flows across the world. Another interesting point about the current players in the internet, is that how the narrative of the future is constructed to really monopolize and take control of the future. And technological companies have been doing that from the beginning. You had Facebook's early motto, which was move fast and break things. And this means, moving always to ever faster, more powerful computing, which privileges digital users who have the most gadgets and income. And so the metaverse is really taking place along this digital divide, which is also known as the innovation gap. And again, as a computing intense program, it only highlights issues around digital accessibility and rights. So I guess what I wanted to really draw out about that is that, we should be looking closely at the metaverse as an evolving narrative of the future. Who is it geared toward? Who is included? Who is excluded? How will these imbalances come fully loaded into digital platforms? And how will they be spatialized and represented as digital landscapes? So, how experience is embodied, how power dynamics become visual and experiential will take on different forms in the metaverse than you see in an explicitly graphic or 2D reality, which will make them all the more potent. So yeah, and then in terms of going back to this idea of digital land, what will these new classes of how will power represent itself in new ways, as you have some people who will be able to own digital property, so to speak, so they'll be able to curate experiences and narratives, and there'll be people who are able to visit but don't own property, and then there's a large group of people globally that can't even access these spaces because of inadequate digital rights and accessibility issues. So you're seeing these emerging sort of divisions taking on a new kind of weight as a sort of more embodied experiential digital experience. So I think that makes the metaverse different, than just a 2D representation that we have on the current internet.
Perfect. I'm sorry for if there's a beeping in the background there. Just in the building.
That's okay.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And again, it's very telling, again, of like all those power centers, and to be very cautious precisely of these agents as they begin to develop this. And I guess, and there's a flip side to this question. We recognize how governments and corporations and all these other major actors are shaping this metaverse. But of course, there's the concept of almost like digital resistance and digital solidarity. So in your article, for example, you spoke about how despite these structural imbalances within the metaverse, and we're already seeing how that's developing now, and especially, many groups of people, and in this case, especially we're talking about Palestinians, they're still managing to assert their agency and kind of use this virtual realm to their advantage. And even in your article, you actually produced a very beautiful sort of piece of it was kind of like I think it was like a t-shirt with a kufiye, like within this online world. It was just as like an example of how even just like aspects of one's identity and political assertion can even something as simple as that, and that can probably still even build even further with all kinds of social infrastructures and so on and so forth. So my question in this respect, what are some of the ways this digital activism is unfolding, even as we're seeing these structural imbalances? And what are some of the key things that you think that Palestinian activists and analysts and so on and so forth should have in mind as they continue to engage in this virtual realm? What should they be keeping an eye on? How can they use this more to their advantage in terms of organizing and movement building and asserting their rights in different respects? Where do you see that Palestinian agency playing in all this?
Yeah, I think there has to be a kind of balance between, deciding on do we even want to participate in systems that are already from the default unfair and unjust, and then balancing that out with, well, what are the real costs and disadvantages of not being able to participate in those systems, because those have real economic and political and cultural repercussions, and also where should we be taking, there's an abolitionist approach of critiquing and disengaging, because of existing power dynamics, but also should Palestinian activists and digital creators be using creativity and boldness, and to really also challenge and hack into these future narratives that right now are stacked in such a way that digital exclusion and digital erasure of Palestinian voices and narratives in those spaces is a very real thing to contend with. So I would say the first thing to keep in mind as well is that there's the deliberate digital de-development of Palestinian communities in Palestine. So while large swaths of the Israeli population are moving to 5G and high-speed broadband, Gaza is still restricted to 2G, and Palestinian network providers are still limited to 3G. So my understanding was in November, the Israeli government agreed to 4G licenses for Palestinian networks, but very little has happened. So there's a real need to actually calculate economically and socially the costs and net losses of the inability to participate digitally. And I think that those kinds of issues only heighten when you start thinking about the metaverse. So that's one element. The other examples that I brought up in my article were things like Palestine VR, which is curating virtual tours from a Palestinian perspective, and then other games like Lilia and Shadows of War. In my work, I was attempting to create digital wearables that are Palestinian themed, And I don't know if I'm hitting political barriers or other issues, but those have yet to materialize. So to go back to key challenges, in the existing internet, if not having access to networks and to platforms has real economic, political, and cultural repercussions. So as activists, we should be trying to balance critiquing structural inequalities of systems, calculating those costs, and holding Israel accountable for their policies of digital de-development, and also having the creativity and boldness to stage meaningful interventions in these emerging spaces to highlight and safeguard Palestinian narratives and perspectives in emerging digital worlds. So, yeah, I think that, yeah.
No, those are great and excellent points, and it highlights again, the extent to which, as these virtual realms continue to evolve, how central they are as a bit of a, I don't want to say battlefield, but they're often the battlefield where they are really oftentimes the front lines for not only resisting, like you said, these kind of narratives or systems of oppression that are trying to silence and quash Palestinian voices and activism, but to say again, like how do we also set the lines of resistance in that respect, from arts, from culture, from just being able to get certain messages across? So these are really crucial, fundamental questions that will continue to, for us to consider and to keep thinking about. Those are my three questions, really. I would think, this is only like a very short conversation for Def, but I highly encourage everyone to please read the article and to follow Amir's work. And I'm sure there'll be more coming in the time period. And this is always an ongoing conversation that's happening, and in the entire conference altogether, I think, is giving us a lot to keep considering. And as we continue to pick up this activism. So Amira, thank you very, very much.
And I just want to add, if anyone is actually working on Palestinian narratives and spaces in the metaverse or emerging virtual worlds, etc., please get in touch with me, because I'm very interested in meeting others who are working in this space, and I think a lot of strategizing and thought and creativity could go into this. So.
Absolutely, please take that up, all our listeners. Thank you very much, Amira, again, and thank you to Hamli as well for hosting us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you all. Bye.
Take care.